We'll recap last year. It was a good year for Bama.
Why would you do that?
One of the best offenses you'll see in college football. The offense under Sark led the nation in passing efficiency, third down chances, averaged 542 yards per game, 49 points per game. But the offense loses a lot, including Sark. We'll start with the OC. They move over to Bill O'Brien at offensive coordinator. I thought it was an interesting hire. His pedigree is obviously off the charts. He was Brady's QB coach in New England. He got a promotion. He was the OC there in 2011 when they had a monster year. They had some killers out wide like Aaron Hernandez. See what I did? Gronk, Welker, Edelman. They had no star running backs, yet Brady was amazing that year. He threw for 5,000 yards. Moves over to Penn State, head coach. Did well, all things considered. They were on heavy sanctions. The only reason he got a bad name in the NFL is because he ruined the team as the GM. But they were actually pretty good when he first got there.
Pretty big deal.
Yeah. A head coach should never be a GM.
This is now like the fucking 1920s when it's like, all right, you know what? I'm the manager, but I'm also going to be batting seventh today in the lineup.
Name's Pete Rose.
What? He actually did that.
Now Bill O'Brien's in the Saban rehab program. From my research, looks like he has a lot of the same concepts as Sark, actually, so maybe it'll be a nice transition over to him. Likes to use multiple backs, which is great because Bama typically has multiple that are good. Quick, short stick routes over the middle. You guys remember that with Welker and Edelman, guys like that. I think we can finally make a legitimate comparison when we talk about Slade Bolden. Hey, he's the next Wes Welker. Hey, actually, he might actually play a Wes Welker role. Maybe you could actually make that comparison. But so for their offense, we'll start there. What have you heard about in camp? Does it look totally different? Is it a tough offense to understand because it's more NFL type concepts? Like, have you heard much about that?
No, and anything that I've heard has been like the biggest thing has been they're young, right? In any kind of fall camp, Saban's not going to give up that much. Bryce Young is the quarterback. I've heard that all three quarterbacks they have on the roster have actually looked really good. Paul Tyson, obviously the backup, and the freshman Jalen Milrose.
That dude looks like a beast, by the way.
Yeah, he looks like very similar like pedigree to Jalen Hurts, but this year it's Bryce Young's team. A higher rated recruit than Tua. Comes from Mater Dei High School in California. He has all of the high school credentials you could want, right? Everything that I've seen, the biggest question for me is like you lose so much production, and every Bama fans will say this nonstop about how they don't rebuild, they reload, and they've got Brian Robinson Jr. is coming back as the running back, and they still got 5-stars everywhere, and it's next man up. You saw a couple of these freshman receivers step up in the spring game. So for me, the question is who does step up on that offense? Because you are it's not just like years past where you're like, all right, we have to replace a 10 touchdown guy. Najee Harris had 30 touchdowns. Devontae Smith won the Heisman. Mac Jones put up a ridiculous season in just 10 what was the total?
He broke this SEC single season passing record.
Right.
And the completion record.
For me, yeah, which is held, or I guess was broken the year before by Joe Burrow. So
dude, 77.4% is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, and yes, but I think you're gonna miss a lot of that because for me, Bryce Young, it's not like Bryce Young is walking in a situation where he's got a bunch of veterans around him, right?
Right.
And I think the biggest thing that's gonna help him is that defense, which we'll get into a little bit later. But for me, it's how young that team is. We've seen this in years past where it's kind of taken a while for the offensive line to gel. We saw it in 2019. In 2020, you didn't really have to deal with that because you had, Alex, why am I forgetting his last name? Alex Leatherwood. They talk about Evan Neal playing right tackle. And then you have, anchoring down your center, you had Landon Dickerson. And you were able to kind of go into the season knowing that was there. So for me, it's just about the youth. Which of these young receivers, because they signed a ridiculous class, just a ridiculous class, specifically at receiver. So which ones come in right away and step up?
Let's go back to Bryce Young. He's on the smaller side. He's 5'11", 6 foot on a good day. He's more mobile, obviously, than Mac Jones. Mac Jones was known more for being a pocket passer. I've seen some comparisons out there to Russell Wilson and his type of play, his build. He's working with a young team, though, very talented but young. When you lose, like you said, Harris, Devontae Smith, Waddle, 3 starting O-linemen, you're starting tight end, 4 offensive assistants. You have all that, and then you have the other side of it, which is he has a lot to live up to, man. Like, not just where the offense was last year, but this whole NIL shit that has blown up. Oh, he's already making $1 million a year. He's not even stepped on the field yet. That's a lot for a 19-year-old kid to come in and put on his back. And I get he was the number 1 recruit coming out of California at the quarterback position. But what are your expectations for him this year?
I've seen anything from like, he could take none of the expectations I've seen have been low, right? It's like Heisman. My expectations are, I honestly just want to see somebody manage the offense and like limit turnovers, because he's a guy that he creates a lot of plays with his feet. He's a guy that's like able to make a lot of extra plays and fit balls into tight windows and do stuff athletically that Mac Jones definitely couldn't do. And maybe even Tua couldn't do without getting injured. I don't know. But like, there's also the ball security part of it, because the number one thing is to be like, especially there's not a lot of breaks in the schedule. And I know people might think that sounds crazy because it's Bama, but like, you open with Miami, which is a good football team. Mm-hmm. You get Florida in week 3. At the very least, that's a very hostile environment. You get Ole Miss in week 5, and that's after they've had a week off to prepare for you. And then you go at A&M. I mean, you play
the very next week in a row. The very next week after Ole Miss, yeah.
So there's not a lot of room for error. And I feel like, for me, the biggest loss is not any player, it's Steve Sarkisian. Because like, there's not a lot of times where Bama's had the continuity that's gone from year over year, where you've kept a lot of coaches on staff. So I'm not trying to sound like doom and gloom. I think that all the pieces could be in place. You've got talent everywhere, right? But what does that look like week 1?
Right. So running back, I can't remember the last time a Bama team hasn't had a running back that is sitting up on the Heisman, I guess, what is it, stage, with a bunch of quarterbacks and then a Bama running back, because he's just all world. So Brian Robinson is the guy that most people talk about this year. He's a Tuscaloosa native, the number 2 back the last 2 seasons behind Najee. 509 total yards last year, 6 touchdowns. So we'll start with him, because I've also heard a lot of good things coming out of camp about Trey Sanders, who's the number 1 recruit at running back position coming out of high school, but's battled a lot of injuries. Brian Robinson, is he going to be used as much as Najee was? Because Najee had 251 carries for almost 1,500 yards, 26 touchdowns, and he caught 43 catches last year for another 425 yards and 4 more touchdowns. That's insane. I mean, 251 carries is insane. Like, that's...
Henry had 397.
Yeah, well, that's
so
also
insane to who?
Yeah.
No, I think that 251 over a potential 15-game season.
Yeah, that's right. And that was a shorter season last year, although they did play 15 games.
By the end of the year, yeah, he definitely will. But I don't think you'll see him used as much as Najee, because one thing people don't remember, or like, not people don't remember this, but people didn't factor in as much as how much Najee was used in the passing game. And I don't know if Brian Robinson is a guy that's going to be used in the passing game, like if they trust him anywhere near as much as they did with him. Because like, it's a kind of more old school about how they've seen it in years past, where you have like, you have a back that is, Brian Robinson, who's like a phenomenal runner, especially in between the tackles, right? Runs hard, and I mean like hard. But like out of the backfield, you'll probably see Jace McClellan. I mean, you'll probably see or Jace McClellan, somebody like that is more of a all-purpose back and more elusive in space. So I don't know. I think it's going to take it's multiple people to make up for like that loss.
Have you been hearing good things about Trey Sanders as well? Just his
health.
I
predicted Trey Sanders to be like the breakout star of this offense for like 3 straight years. I've heard good things. Like, I mean, he was in a really serious, I think it was like either a helicopter or like a plane or something like that, like wreck, or Or no, I know he was airlifted. I don't know if it was like,
he was in a helicopter, but it was already after the wreck.
Right.
It was like a car wreck.
But regardless, like he's also had an ACL injury. He's had several injuries like to kind of set him back. I hope he is, because we've also seen him at times where he was not. It might have been last year. Like he did not look great early on. It might have been 2019 as well. But I think the running game is going to have to be like the most stable part of that offense for like the first several games.
Yeah, you got a lot to replace at receiver. Let's move there. John Metchi, the big name there, finished with 916 yards and 6 touchdowns next to Devontae Smith last year. That's not 916 yards is a fantastic year in college, but it was just so overshadowed by the fact that Devontae Smith was the Heisman winner. He actually averaged more yards per catch than Devontae did. So I think he's the known entity there. People know Slade Bolden as well. Future owner of Slade Bolden Chevrolet Tuscaloosa. You may, like I said before, you may actually be able to say that he is the Wes Welker of the offense when you're talking about Bill O'Brien being the offensive coordinator, and he had Wes Welker and Julian Edelman type guys in that role. But there's a ton of young, obviously super talented receivers. The guy that stood out to me when I watched the Bama spring game was, I think I don't know how you say his first name, Agiye Hall.
Yeah, I have no clue.
He looked impressive, man. And I remember he's from Florida, so he was on my radar a couple years ago coming out, and he was one of the best receivers in the state as a junior. So I think he might be the next big game breaker. But any words on newcomers and who could break out of that position outside of Metchi and Bolden? And then is Jaleel Billingsley, like, after the whole Saban rant, what's going on there?
So we'll move on to the defense after this, because I don't want to spend like the entire episode on Bama, but like, we know what they lack. I think the receiver part is like the biggest question, because one thing we've seen that's been consistent in Bama over the years, like whether it's Lane Kiffin on the offense, whether it's Sark or whoever, you've seen them key on one person. Like in 2017, Jalen Hurts kind of got tagged with that. Like it was always like Calvin Ridley. But we've seen one guy be the focal point. And you look at last year, they only returned one of their top 5 pass catchers. And you had, again, Najee Harris, who had the 4th most. Najee Harris had the 4th most receptions on the team, right, as a running back. Jalen Waddle had the 3rd most. He was out for over half the year. Yeah. So, like 23 touchdowns. Like, talk about the production. John Metchi had 6. I think, like, people that are smarter than me think Metchi will be just fine. He will be one of the top receivers in the SEC, if not the country. One person I've heard a decent amount is, you talk about, what's his name? Jameson Williams from Ohio State. Yeah. So I think that's a guy like that, a very high level recruit, a guy that comes in right away and adds like depth to a place that desperately needs it. For me, the Jaleel Billingsley thing is like, he became like a really good weapon, like a very underrated weapon at the end of last season. He only had 3 touchdowns. He did, like, his numbers won't blow you away, but he was a very, very big weapon, I think, for that offense, like, at the end of last year. His counterpart, because I think what you see, you talked about earlier, 2011, you talk about with Gronk and Aaron Hernandez, and he comes from the NFL background where they use a lot of multiple tight end sets. Cameron Latou, who's my breakout player on offense, he's a guy that I think will be like, I think they'll be fine at the tight end position. I really do. You might not have both of them, because I think Jaleel Billingsley will probably play at some point. I don't know what he's been doing off the field. Obviously, it's been the subject of several, a couple Saban rants and quotes. But I think the keys for that offense, they need to have productive tight end play. I think they will. And there has to be another guy. It's going to be a young guy, most likely, because Slade Bolden, I don't think, can do it for you. But who's going to be the other receiver to take the attention off Metchi? Because Metchi, I don't know how this happened so much last year. Devontae Smith, he would get open no matter what the coverage was. Like, everyone in the country knew who was getting the ball. I don't think you're going to be able to do that this year with this cast.
One name to note, I think, before we move to the defense, he's a freshman, so we'll see. But you mentioned Slade Bolden may not be able to get the job done. Christian Leary, he's a freshman that just came in. went to college and was pretty good friends with his head coach from high school down in Florida. He said that dude is the absolute truth. So he's more of a slot player. So keep an eye out for Christian Leary. Moving to the defense, personnel losses aren't nearly as massive on that side of the ball. They do lose Surtain and Barmore. Dylan Moses, was the all-world guy coming in. I don't know if necessarily that's a huge loss given his health relatively. I don't know about you. I don't know what the stats would say if you look at advanced analytics, but it doesn't seem like the defense has been Bama defense of the past 2 seasons under Golding. Do you feel that way too, or no?
No, so I think that Golding got a really bad rap in 2019. 2019, they lost their starting 2 linebackers, which were the only players in that position that were not freshmen. You lost a 6-year senior, and you lost Dylan Moses, who was like a projected first-round pick at the time before his injury. You had a lot of players that were not very experienced. Last year, that defense was they gave up points at times. People like to talk about the Ole Miss game. We talk about the Florida game. Those are really good offenses. They're top 5 offenses in the country. Yeah. And Saban kind of talked to this is, I bring up the 2011 defense all the time as being the best defense in college football history because statistically they were unmatched. They gave up 8.6 points per game and 171 yards per game. We're never going to see that again.
Yeah.
Defenses aren't going to be that good in the way that the game is played now with offenses being such a focal point. I thought the defense was really good last year. I thought it was really good. I mean, they were able to do a lot of different things. They were able to pressure the quarterback. They were able to, at times they weren't great against the run. But I thought they were really good. They were going into this season. It's obviously the strength. But I think that the biggest difference between even last year is you don't lose anything from a leadership standpoint. Surtain was fantastic. Barmore was great late in the year, but you don't lose anything from a leadership standpoint. You return still a lot of talent in the secondary. Josh Jobe, I think statistically, PFF, of course, was one of the best cornerbacks in the country last year. He was fantastic. The starting defensive tackles, I think you're going to see players that are going to be more consistent than Barmore because he kind of came on at the end of the year when he wanted to. And then you talk about those linebackers. I mean, having Henry Toto step in and with Christian Harris, and then you have so much depth there, I think the defense will be really good.
So I was looking at it. Christopher Allen and Will Anderson were 1st and 3rd, respectively, in tackles for loss in the SEC last year, which, by the way, ridiculous for a true freshman like Will Anderson to come in and do that with that kind of production. You know who was 4th in the SEC in tackles for loss? Henry 2020.
Love it.
So nice little ad there to pair with the 1st and 3rd. Then you pair those guys with Christian Harris. It's almost unfair what they're doing at that position. Malachi Moore was a freshman All-American at Star. So I feel really good about the Bama defense this year. I don't know really what else to say. I think they're probably going to they'll fight Georgia for the top unit defensively in the SEC and in the country.
Yeah, I can see that. Let's not leave out San Jose State because they are absolutely loaded and returned so many starters on defense. They were great. But, for me, it's that that D-line, that 2017, 2016 Bama teams where you saw so much not just talent on defense, but you saw non-offensive touchdowns and constantly making plays. I think this team will need to do that early on with such a young quarterback. Tim Smith would be the guy that's a breakout player for me. And if that defensive line can stay healthy, they're going to be really good. They're going to be really, really good.
So the over-under on this team is 11.5. So what? They basically have to go undefeated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the juice is on the under. I think that's fair. I think I'm very conflicted on this because I've learned over time that I never bet against Bama. I just don't. I refuse to do it. It's a bad idea for your wallet. I also have a principle that if someone has an 11.5 over/under, you have to bet the under. It's just you can't bet on someone going undefeated. It's not smart. So I'm taking the bet as a pure principle. I hate this. because I'm already gonna regret it. We're gonna hang up here, and I'm gonna be like, I just bet against Bama, and now I'm gonna be wrong, and Bama's gonna go undefeated. But pure principle, I gotta bet the under. I know Bama always reloads, but there is so much to be replaced on the offensive side of the ball, not just with personnel, but with coaching. And Saban's the best in the game at being able to do that. But they have to go undefeated. And you go on the road to Florida, on the road to A&M. You got Ole Miss and LSU at home. There's a lot of landmines there for a team that has so much to reload. Plus, you had Miami, like you said, at the neutral site. So I hate betting against Bama, but this is a pure principle bet. I'm going under the 11.5. What about you?
Yeah, I am too. I think they go 11-1 or 10-2. And I think that, there's a lot of confidence in Tuscaloosa. I think, especially because of that defense and they have talent everywhere. But for me, 9 of the past 10 seasons, I'm sorry, not including last year, 8 of the last 10 seasons, you've lost at least one game. I like those odds. There are a lot of landmines, like you said, in this in the scheduling. And, that first game, I've been saying this all offseason, I don't think that they're going to cover that 17 against Miami. When you talk about a Rhett Lashley offense, a very dynamic playmaker at quarterback, and, like a Manny Diaz coach defense that is notorious for blitzing, getting after the quarterback, providing a lot of pressure. I think that early on, man, there's 4 games there that are like, you're going to see Bama at least once where they have to survive. Like I'm talking about like where they have to survive. Like the Ole Miss game last year. And I mean that for either Miami, Florida, A&M, and Ole Miss. You might see multiple games like that. Now, once they get through that, I think they'll be fine with LSU. It's a revenge game. It's at home. And I think they'll handle, the rest of the schedule, including Auburn. But yeah, I just think that in a year like this, there's just, you look at Georgia's schedule. We talked about it, we'll talk about it later on. It's a lot more, it's a lot easier to navigate than this one.
Yeah, Clemson's obviously a huge opponent for Georgia, but they're going to be favored in every other game, no doubt. And they should win every other game based upon, some of their opponents being a little bit down this year. So yeah, we're both going under. So as you know, Bama will go undefeated at this point, probably win the championship again, because you never bet against Bama. But it should be interesting. I could see this being the season where Bryce Young has a couple hiccups and people are like, oh man, he's just not the guy. And then the following year, he follows it up with one of the best seasons of all time. That kind of story.
Go ahead.
No, that's all I was going to say on that.
There's 2 things that could happen this season that I think would be hilarious. As like somebody that grew up as like a Bama fan. What if this defense really is that good and is able to kind of like be like that 2016 defense, and they kind of change that whole narrative of like, well, defense doesn't really matter anymore. Like, what if they're able to just be head and shoulders above everyone in the country and just be dominant? The other thing is, what if Georgia fans, hear me out here? What if Bama goes 10-2 and somehow gets to Atlanta with no chance of getting into the playoff unless they win?
And plays Georgia.
And Georgia's 11-1 and 12-0 and they beat them.
I mean, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Well, I don't want to know what Georgia fans will feel like that after that. I just don't even want to know what that. Don't put that hate on me, Ricky Bobby.
We'll find out soon enough. It'll be a fun season for sure.
Yeah, so we got a couple more teams coming up. We got Florida and Georgia to get to after this, and so we appreciate you tuning in. Hey, it's game week, baby. Let's go.